Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, How and Why Celgene Adopted Medidata Rave eCOA, presented by Medidata. I'm Joe Keenan, contributing editor to Fierce Biotech, and I'll be moderating this webinar. Our speakers today are Diane Gardner, Director, Data Management at Celgene, Stacy Davin, Director, Clinical Programming, Rave at Celgene, and Joe Dustin, Director, eCOA and Mobile Health at Medidata. You can read their full bios on the left side of your window by selecting the Profile button on the bottom of your screen. Just a few technical notes before we begin. If you'd like to download the slide deck, please click the orange Handouts button at the bottom of your screen. The webcast is being streamed through your computer, so there is no dial-in number. For the best audio quality, please make sure your volume is up. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand within 24 hours after the event. Time permitting, we will follow the presentations with a Q&A session. Please submit your questions using the Questions and Answers tab on the left side of your screen, and you can do that throughout the presentation. All right, I think that covers it. We're ready to begin. Joe, please go ahead.
All right, thanks, and good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. Today we're going to go over to me anyway, a pretty exciting case study on how Celgene went in and changed their process and redeployed a new solution for electronic clinical outcome assessments within their organization across all therapeutic areas to collect data from patients, improve their data quality, and really change their process, reduce cycle times, improve an overall working environment with some more modern technology. So today I'm very pleased to have Stacy and Diane with us from Celgene to discuss their experience, and since they were the two leads on the project, they have the most to talk about here, and we're really excited to have that discussion. So a little bit of an agenda that we're going to have. First, we'll go over a little bit of a solution. What is the solution that Celgene rolled out? What is Medidata Rave eCOA, sometimes talked about as the patient cloud? I'll give you a little bit of an overview on what that is. And then Diane will start off by going through their process reengineering overview and implementation strategy. The idea here is that we're not just talking about in this webinar about the technology, it's the entire process that Celgene went through to get top-down approval from management to implement a new system, what metrics were important to them, what was the overall value to be delivered to the company, where were the pain points and how would we resolve them. That, I think, to the industry at large and those of you attending this webinar today is even in some cases more important than the technology being used because the process really is how do you enact change and what does that process look like and what are the key important things that were used to make that happen. So I'm really excited for that webinar, for that content today in this webinar to really share with the audience on what they went through. So to start, I want to get a read on the audience real quick with a polling question. So all of you out there, you look at your screen, pull out your mouse. What is your experience level today with eCOA, with electronic clinical outcome assessment solutions used in clinical trials? And there's three options you want to choose from. So are you an expert? Have you seen it all? Many of you, I'm sure, are. Do you consider yourself experienced, but you're still learning, things are changing, and you'd like to learn more? Or I'm pretty new to eCOA and I want to learn more, and that's why I'm here. I just want to get a read on the audience, so I'll just give it like 15 seconds so you guys can go ahead and answer that now. Okay, we'll give it about 5 more seconds. Cast your votes now. And good. Okay, so it looks like the majority of people that are here are new to eCOA. They want to learn more, and that's really great. We have some great people here to learn more about what's happening and talk to you about the types of challenges and how we overcame them in the implementation process. So good to know. Thanks for answering that poll. So the first thing I'm going to do is talk to you about the solution that Celgene implemented. So this is Medidata Rave's eCOA solution. But when we think about the patient experience as well as the entire study experience, it is more than just eCOA in many cases. When you have a patient that comes into a clinical trial, you want to change the process and how things are happening. So today we're going to focus on eCOA, but there's more to eCOA beyond that Medidata is working on. There's electronic informed consent that starts from the very beginning. Instead of dropping a stack of papers in front of a patient to consent for their participation, why not give them a mobile app? Why not give them an experience that gives them videos and gives them educational material in an easy to understand manner, so that they retain the information longer and hopefully stay in the trial longer by understanding what they're really about to get into and what their roles and responsibilities are. Electronic informed consent is become more of a thing that's happening now in the clinical trials industry. It is becoming more adopted globally now, and you will see that out there very much, in many cases, tied to electronic clinical outcome assessment solutions. They in many cases are the same and working together. But then from there, we also have the ability to register the patients in the same system that you're already using. In this case, is the Medidata platform. But then if you want to plug in wearables and start to collect other types of data continuously from patients at home, outside of visits, in a decentralized manner, leading toward a virtual trial environment, this is where things get interesting. Having that process set up in a continuous way in a single system to make the user experience easy for sites as well as patients, because the sites need to be able to use this to be comfortable training the patients as well. That's important. It's important to the experience. Data integration and work on the back end is something that companies like Medidata have taken care of for years in working with our clients, but the front end really does matter to make the experience better. As more and more technology gets put into clinical trials, the user experience cannot be affected. It needs to be made easy, and that's kind of where we sit in this world. And that's the kind of work that we're doing right now around eCOA, around Rave, and everything to do with the capture of data in clinical trials, not just EDC, much more than EDC now. This is everything. But to give you one differentiator, and this goes back to why one of the reasons Celgene picked this solution to implement in the new way of doing things, that the Medidata eCOA solution is unified with the platform. So it's part of Rave. If you already use Rave EDC, which is in use, last I checked, in more than 50% of clinical trials in the world, you already have this solution built in. It's one system. It's one database. It's the same build. It's the same backend, the same audit trails, the same user experience, single sign-on. It's all there. It's in many cases a no-brainer to be able to turn this solution on and be able to deploy it quite easily. Not only that, but in Medidata's perspective, we're able to deliver this in a full-service manner, or we can enable you and your organization to do this yourself, or there's an army of CROs ready to go and that are being enabled today to do all this work for you in the same way we did with EDC 10 years ago. So we're making this easier for the industry to adopt with more modern technology and getting more people involved to be able to deploy this in new ways. eCOA is not and should not be a custom solution anymore. It should be able to be configurable and seamless. And so from an end-to-end implementation, beyond the technology, there's a lot more going on that has to be taken into account when it comes to process, when it comes to implementation, support. Medidata can do all of this today, but all, again, functionally outsource, or companies can take pieces of this functionally as necessary to create a full solution for the end user, for the end client. We're dealing with everything from global device logistics and hardware provisioning to help desk to training to study build, to dealing with translations and the instrument authors and owners and copyright holders and migrating those instruments from paper to electronic, dealing with the newer things, like the same system can handle BYOD for the future, and be able to handle all of this in line with the scientific team to consult on what to do, where, and when. So we're doing this with our partners. We're doing this with a team internally. We've scaled up quite a bit over the past 2 years. Things have evolved substantially, and as you've seen in the industry, the adoption of eCOA has changed and increased, especially in the past 3 years. We would say that about 25% of all clinical trials that are able to collect data from patients are using eCOA. So paper is still one of the main areas where we still see pervasive in the industry, but that is rapidly changing right now. And the systems that are out there, there is quite a choice now to be able to go there. And so to give you a preview a little bit of what's some of what we see as the benefits to the platform approach to electronic clinical outcome assessments, at least from where we sit at Medidata and what Celgene has experienced, is faster study startup. So timelines are going down. Faster time to information means that you get data in real time. So there is no integration. I'll say it again. Rave is eCOA. There is no integration. There is no second system. It's the same system. You already have this if you're using Rave EDC. If you're not using Rave EDC, there's also a way that this will work standalone. But the biggest benefit from the platform approach is definitely being able to not deal with custom data transfers, not dealing with separate systems and integrations, and a whole separate closeout processes, as well as startup processes to bring those cycle times down. DCFs, why these are still around, I'm not sure. But DCFs, data change forms, they exist. They are necessary for certain reasons. In many cases, they will never go away. But we will see, as Diane and Stacy will show, that in their process, they were able to eliminate 100% of DCFs that are related to eCOA data, specifically because they used the Medidata platform on top of everything they're already using today. So that process was a substantial impact to that extra work in data management that no longer has to happen. I didn't believe it when I first saw it, but this is something they'll talk about. Also, less inspection findings. So the idea of the single audit trail collecting all of this data and the elimination of DCFs will create less inspection issues like what we've seen from MHRA and even from FDA going through. They've had findings over the past couple years from clients. This has been in the news on how to avoid some of these things. MHRA told us if this audit trail, if these details were already in the same audit trail as an EDC system, the way we deal with Rave today, these issues wouldn't come up. And that was a refreshing thing to hear from them, and it's true, because these issues just sort of melt away in this approach to data management when it comes to eCOA. So I'm excited to don't take it from me, we'll hear from Diane and Stacy next. But before we switch the phone to Diane, that will start off on our process reengineering, I want to put out one final poll to the audience. And this poll is, how would you or your team answer the following question today? And this is really just gauging your idea of where you are in the use of eCOA at your company today. So are you happy with a single provider? Are you looking to evaluate multiple vendors today? Are you taking a multi-vendor strategy? Or are you just not really doing that much right now? I just was curious to find out where everyone's mind was on the phone to how you look at the types of technology you choose. So I'll give you about 15 seconds to answer this poll. Go now. Let's give you a few more seconds to answer this poll. And we're good. Okay, so this is not surprising, but looking for multi-vendor strategies and looking to evaluate multiple vendors now is the majority opinion here. It's nice to see that there are some up there, a small amount, but some that are happy with the one vendor they're using today, so that's nice. But this is what I'm seeing right now in the industry, is that there's a large evaluation process happening. So with that, I will hand this over to Diane Gardner to talk about their process and how they started to build the case for changing the way they do eCOA at Celgene. Diane?
Thank you, Joe. Good morning, everyone. So prior to our workshops and working sessions that Stacey's going to talk about in a minute, we did a lot of gathering of stakeholder feedback, and it was cross-functional to find out, what are we doing currently at Celgene with eCOA and where are we going in the future. It was no surprise that Celgene currently uses eCOA in lots of different ways. We measure secondary endpoints, exploratory endpoints. We capture KOL indication, whether it be disease specific or general. And we even have some studies capturing primary endpoints with composite measurements and actually some complicated scoring. And in terms of where we're going with eCOA in the future, we're seeing an uptick. We have a lot of protocols that are in flight now, but they're going back and amending them to add eCOA data. And we're finding more and more protocols are starting out with eCOA already built in. And why? Well, the QOL assessments, may illustrate advantages for Celgene treatment versus our competitors. It engages with our patients, and we're collecting a tremendous amount of additional data. And we think that the absence of this data is going to pose a regulatory or payer risk. We know the pro claims are a top priority for EMA. So again, it's just like Joe was saying before, it's, one step on the ladder, moving towards digital clinical trials. Stacey, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Diane. To continue with the assessment and information gathering from stakeholders, pre to determining to move forward with this particular capability, they did poll a large group of our end users to see where are they feeling now. Are they having any issues? So some of the challenges that they've been facing was a lot of time-consuming device programming. For studies, the setup is taking quite some time, which could lead to timely startups, but also mixed models where we were deploying paper and then ultimately having some devices go out into the sites as well, and putting us in that state of a mixed model to get our trials up and running. We also found that there were some inconsistencies in our site training because of the way we were structured. A lot of our trial managers were working on providing training materials. And of course, if you have each person doing it slightly different, you're sending a different message to sites, and that could be of a concern, especially when you're reusing the same sites and with multiple trials, they may be receiving materials slightly differently, which can cause some of the data collection issues that we were facing. There was also, from an oversight perspective, because we didn't really have a functional owner around this particular type of data collection activity, we were seeing that there was no way to even have shared lessons learned. Self-monitoring, the teams would do it amongst themselves. If they were thinking from a program-level approach, they would data share with each other, but that's also not the best way to information share amongst the teams because we have different therapeutic areas, and one of those areas could definitely benefit from what maybe I had done versus what HEMONC is doing. We want to make sure everyone's getting the same message. So that was one of the pain points that they had also noted that was really significant. And Joe touched on it as well, the transmission of data, not having real-time data available for download, having scheduled data transfers and having to do external specifications. This was also an inconsistency that we found amongst our teams because there was times where our trial management was taking on specification creation, and then also sometimes our programmers were involved and data management was involved, but it was inconsistent around who had the roles and responsibilities to be involved with this activity. Diane?
Okay, thanks, Stacey. So, of course, throughout this whole initial phase, we had to keep our site and patient experience, first and foremost in our minds. And we felt that, embedding a standardized and efficient process, this is going to be, the patient experience would be improved. So on the left side, our current state, you can see we have multiple vendors and formats, electronic as well as paper, as Stacey mentioned. So there's a need for a lot of hardware on site as well as paper, and our patients need to learn to use multiple methods of data collection. So moving to the right, and where we'd like our future to be, our sites are already familiar with Rave eCOA functionality, and that translates very well to the patient cloud experience. So our devices are reusable. You could have multiple Celgene studies on one device, and I think that's a big plus for our sites. So after we did all the evaluation, we took a look at the Medidata eCOA tool, or the patient cloud, and our key takeaways were that it would support most of our studies that use eCOA at Celgene. We find that the cost of the support and services are less than our typical vendors. And of course, the big plus is that the data integrates directly into Rave eDC, which is that whole real-time review, monitoring, and analysis. Device provisioning is device provisioning. You have to have that, so that's not really a change. It's kind of standard. It does support patient diaries, which was a value to us. So as Joe, he ticked these off earlier, but the real value for us is faster study startup, better device and data support, better and faster instrument migration, better support, device support and site training, as well as less technical issues with the devices. So now we're moving into what our implementation strategy was, so what we were calling it in a perfect world. The project, there was an overall program that Joe mentioned that was the full platform, and then individual projects, which eCOA was one of the projects within the program. The same methodology was followed throughout, and it was really process first. And it wasn't where we went in a room and we took our current process and we just added things one on top of the other. We actually went in and we clean slate, started and built an end-to-end process with what we felt was best in class. What's that going to look like? In some cases, it was exactly what we do. It was our current state. In other cases, we thought, well, you know what, we could do better. And so that's what we did, end-to-end. And then after that was done, we plugged in the people. What function and where do they fit into this process? And then ultimately, like Joe said, the technology came in and we plugged that in. I do want to say that this was a corporate-sponsored initiative, and all decisions at all levels, process, people, technology, were reviewed and approved as well as endorsed by our executive leadership, and I think that was critical to the success of this program.
Thanks, Diane. Yes, thanks, Diane. So as Diane mentioned, we really had a program-level approach to the platform and evaluating the modules and capabilities associated with the platform itself. The endorsement by our leadership was key. For Patient Cloud, we were able to really get a nice cross-functional team with data management, science from each therapeutic area. We had programming that was available, statistics, our trial managers. It was truly a cross-functional team, having us go into a room, like Diane said, multiple sessions, and being able to freely think about how we want our process to be, what do we want our future to look like, what is our vision moving forward. So the patient capability team did develop this particular value statement, vision, and goal for what our project ultimately wanted to look like. I think the vision for me was one of the most key points of this particular project because it really is truly about improving our patients and our site experience. That's number one always. Secondarily for us, obviously getting the database up and running quicker, all those other time factors that pull in are key, but it's really improving that patient and site experience. And with one of the look and the feel of the application of Rave and the app itself for eCOA, for Patient Cloud, it's consistent amongst the sites as they reuse the application for our studies. That look and feel was very nice for them. We wanted to also have the consistent training, which this allows for us to think about a vision and a goal of having that consistent training material that was missing before. We also wanted to make sure that the streamlining of the maintenance for our application was also present, which we get from our Rave platform to make sure we're always up to date on the most current application and functionality within the system. So that was something that was also very critical for us moving forward.
So if I ask a question, Stacy, so the vision was really to standardize, reduce the burden on the sites, improve consistency, and are you seeing on a study-by-study basis that the feedback coming back right now, I know this is still in the vision, right, but are these goals, was that agreed upon by the clinical teams as well? It's a cross-functional thing, right? So how did you get the buy-in on this vision to get the clinical teams to change? Because I've just heard from other folks that I talk to across the industry that is sometimes a big challenge because it's a change in some cases for what they're typically doing. Any comments on that, on how they receive that vision?
Yeah, it has directly related to the program implementation and the appropriate involvement from all the functions. and having the buy-in from that management. So having them actually part of this particular team, going out to the science and clinical folks, presenting the materials and where our vision is and where we want to go, having that communication and change management moving through the project as opposed to waiting till the end. I think that was very different about the type of program that was led. We didn't create the processes and just roll out the training. It was something that we did over time and made sure we kept our other functions engaged.
Yeah.
And that was a critical piece to the entire program.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Jim. So one of the other challenges that the team was faced with to go into the room, and how are they going to go from where we were before and get there. So this is really coming down to that capability team, having the ideas and putting it out there in these open discussions, which we were allowed to have, and how are they going to improve their process that was outlined and identified by key stakeholders that Diane had mentioned and reviewed earlier. And so some of the items that they had put out there is, setup. Obviously, that was an issue. How are we going to address that moving forward in this capability and process? Joe, you hit the nail on the head. It's part of the database build. It's very quick. I built the forms myself as well when we were testing the application. It's part of the study build, so it's more holistic. Another area that is key to hit on was that start earlier in the build timelines. How are we going to address this? That's sort of agnostic to other applications. It's really getting the licensing piece going earlier. How do we address that piece as well, right? So we were coming up with ideas on how to get that moving a little bit earlier. We also have standards that are in place, so we knew once that standards were created that was also going to speed some of our time. Around adoption and training, I think one of the key bullet points is this no paper backup. I know Diana's going to touch on that a little bit later regarding the actual implementation, but this was the proposal that the team put out there, is not to have any paper backup of instruments whatsoever. It's 100%. If you're using the patient cloud, it's 100% patient cloud. And also around adoption, it really does go to clear roles and responsibilities. That was something else that we were tasked with as a capability in going through our process and defining our process maps, who truly is going to take ownership of certain pieces to help the process be much more smooth and consistent across the organization. And then having the clear oversight and management and centralized person to go to. Diane will get into that a little bit later, but how can we streamline some of the activities? How can we, collect lessons learned and have appropriate feedback? So addressing that issue. And then, of course, the real-time integration and being able to actually see the data coming in was also something that was key, and also being able to export it on a timely manner. This was also very key for us because from a programming perspective, I think I alluded earlier from specification development, there was a lot of parties that may not have been involved. So now we have a very clear process that we were proposing to have the appropriate people in place around development.
So to my point earlier, Stacy, about the clinical teams getting their buy-in, how do they react to the idea of no paper backups?
Oh, I don't want to steal Diane's thunder.
Oh, she's got that. Okay, we'll save that. That's fine. That's fine. We'll save that. All right, then next, keep going. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you want me to go back?
Well, go back one. So
Sure.
The idea around the setup as part of the EDC build. So was there as you're moving from good to great, you're already building things internally. You have CROs involved building as well in your model for doing work at Celgene. And so how did you deal with standards? I know you're very advocate of standards and from a data management perspective. What was the piece there that you were trying to figure out how to enable standards to be done and truly be able to reuse things across studies? What was the plan in that paradigm?
So that does tie into existing processes that we have into place. So because it's part of the study build, it actually folds into an existing study build process. So we took advantage of that. So we didn't have to reinvent the wheel, but there's an existing process we have in place where we have standards management that ties in for any new forms and metadata that needs to be present and SDTM mapping that needs to be present. So we took advantage of that, to be honest, and folded it in instead of having to deal with it separately.
That's great. Okay.
Yeah, those were one of the touch points that really worked out between other capabilities and some existing process. Okay. So as the capability team, we were also tasked with, coming up with some key value drivers based off of the future state improvements that we were proposing. I think some of the key ones, again, is the device programming itself. We have the CRF programming, leveraging existing study build processes, to your point that we were just talking about. No paper backup is like the big one for us. Opportunities for lessons learned and continuous improvements too. So I think the continuous improvement part is also a key piece and a key value driver. As you roll out a project and a program, revisit it, and collect feedback. Do we need to make some modifications? What's going well? That's really looking into the future of the usage, but something that is important to continue to do, because rolling out a project and just leaving it as is also will become a challenge for success. So revisiting appropriately and making either updates to materials and updates to processes needed is really key for us. So we wanted to make sure that was included. And also, as Joe, you had mentioned, from the real-time integration standpoint, the data is available in the extracts immediately. The data is loaded into Rave immediately. However, companies will download their data, whether it's a scheduled transfer you have set up monthly or you do your SAS on demand, but through your JReview listings, you could actually see the data through Rave. You could do any type of reporting that you needed on top of that. So that was one of the other factors that was also really a key value driver, not having to have a separate application to do data reviews for this. It's because it's part of the system.
I can imagine that saves a lot of time. This slide, those of you that are attending remotely and watching this webinar either right now, this, I think, is the money slide. If you're looking to enact change inside your company, identifying what the key metrics are to people that care to enact change. I think this slide is, would you say this is probably the slide that you used to aggregate all of the big value points to your teams?
Yeah, that's true. Absolutely.
That's great.
Yeah. Okay. Diane, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Stacy. So now we have, implementation. How did it go in real life? We did have challenges. We're not gonna hide. And some of them were pretty normal for, using eCOA in general, but some of the things that happen, we have new responsibilities for users, and Stacy mentioned before. I like to use an example. We had, in our old process, data managers were not involved at all. They didn't do the specifications. They may have been pulled into some device testing, but in general, they were not involved. And as the data came in, the team started turning around and saying, hey, data manager, what's wrong with this data? So we knew we had a gap there. So we definitely changed that and pulled DM as, a key member of the process and testing. And then, of course, for some study team members, the study managers in particular, they're very involved. But if they've never used eCOA on a study, the whole thing was new to them. So it wasn't necessarily patient cloud changing anything, but just in general, eCOA was new for them. The second bullet there, collaboration. Of course, it's a new vendor, another vendor, and the coordination is very key. I'm actually in the role of eCOA manager. And so I am a key point of contact between the different parties. And I think that does help a bit. People at least know to come to me if they have questions, and I can help them and guide them through things. Medidata and the CRO team in the same build space, that was tricky for our first couple of studies. We made the choice and the decision to have Medidata build the instruments, and our CROs continue to build the main study. We did have one instance where a database was overwritten while someone else was still working on edit checks. So, of course, that caused some anxiety, and we had to quickly, get ourselves together, talk about it, and put it in a best practices document where everybody should be and when. We can't say enough, the licensing process can be a burden, and it goes on for a long time in some instances, so that needs to be started very early. Since the instruments are CRF, they are part of study build, and they need to be ready for go live. And if you haven't gotten that licensing piece done, you're going to be in trouble. and that's where, of course, the no paper backup comes in. We used to have studies go live with paper instruments and then the devices provisioned later. That's not a possibility anymore. Yes, it caused some study teams some anxiety, but we're not seeing, that there's tremendous amounts of data loss at this point. So I think that paper backups is just something that people get used to, but you don't necessarily have to have. Again, the new forms do require metadata. So our first couple of studies, since we had nothing collected together from a metadata perspective, we had to do some back mapping for the first few studies, but now we have some significant reuse at this point. So our metadata is coming along, and we have more and more stuff that can be reused versus starting from scratch.
So Diane, I had some questions just to expand on a couple topics here on the challenges, because I think everyone has challenges in using new technology, and there's always something. I think it's important about how the channels are handled, what we learn from it, and how you move forward, right? So it's great that I think there's a big benefit for people on the phone to understand just the real life of what you guys are going through. So thank you for sharing this. Let me ask you about the no paper backups. So I know this is just a habit, right? It's in data management. I think everyone has been trained, and in some cases incentivized, and had process put around to avoid missing data at all costs. And this is in clinical, this is in data, this is everything. And nobody wants to have gaps in their data, I understand. And we want to avoid that by improving compliance and having a good user experience, and then also being able to notify when things are going off to be able to intervene earlier. But what to you is the trade-off between a couple missing data points and dirtying the data set with now paper data capture and dealing with the process and operationally to do that? What is the trade-off there in your mind, and what's the stance you guys have taken there to really enforce this no paper backup policy?
I mean, I think it comes down to the studies that are using a paper backup. It doesn't go well. It's one thing to just remind the teams, hey, by the way, do you remember the hundreds of DCFs, thousands of DCFs you had to handle? Where here, we definitely want to window when these QOLs are being done. You want to make sure they're being done in a timely, accurate time frame. So collecting them outside of that, you're right, you're getting dirty data. You're getting data. It's that old thought that they're just sitting in the parking lot filling out the forms. Well, we don't want that anymore. We want real data, real time, and I think that's what the agencies are expecting. I don't know, Stacey, do you have a thought on that?
No, I agree with what you were saying, and I was also I took a note down. We also deploy a backup device. I think that was also one of the things to address the issue and the concern if there was just one device. So we do also deploy a backup one for the site. So they do have two in case. So they have two available to use. And depending on the size of the study and how many patients, we might even deploy additional ones. But standard is always two.
Okay. Let me talk to you about the author licensing process. So I know at Medidata we have a team of people that are dealing with the authors, that are procuring licenses, that are doing that process on behalf of our clients and sort of presenting you with the final contract to sign. But I know Celgene, you have people internally that are doing this, and Diane, I know you're involved. So can you talk to me about how you guys are doing this? We know this is an area that's really sort of unrelated to technology, that an eCOA is a thing that in many ways can extend timelines and create frustration. But can you talk to me a little bit about how you're handling this, go a little deeper as to why it's a burden, but what you're doing to sort of make it better?
Yeah, so actually the licensing piece was pretty much untouched by this new implementation of Patient Cloud. It was a current state thing. We have our portfolio sourcing and relationship management team, and they have a group that is responsible for interfacing and interacting with the authors for licenses and the copies of the instruments. So that all happens. Our study managers are responsible for doing that piece. So where I might get involved is if there is a need for a third-party agreement with one of the authors, then I would contact the project manager at Medidata to get that going. But that piece is pretty much well-oiled. It's been going on for a long time. It's really, the time that it takes is really just author-dependent.
Great.
Yeah, I think that's one of the pieces too, Diane, that we're still challenged with, like, because we wanted to propose to start everything earlier from when we were a capability, a draft PCS, where it's final. I think we're still having a challenge getting it started a little earlier. I think we can do better there and really hit what we wanted to as a capability by using the draft PCS around questionnaires, because they're solid at that point and starting to move forward much earlier on, because that buys you a lot of weeks of time. Right, Diane?
Yep, that's right.
Great. Okay. And finally, new responsibilities for users. So I'm assuming the users are the sites and the patients and the time it takes to train them. And what is the initial feedback you've gotten so far from the users? Diane, I guess I'll... Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, I think when we put that on the slide, I think we were really talking about use more at Celgene versus site and patient. Is really more around functions not being involved in the process at Celgene. I mean, Stacey, do you see it differently?
No, I think that's accurate from that perspective, really making
it's
sure the right...
change.
It's internal change and making sure the right people and the roles and responsibilities, because during the stakeholder evaluation, when they did go to the cross-functional teams, this was a common theme that not certain people just weren't involved. Like Diane had mentioned, data management wasn't involved. Programming may or may not have been involved at times. It was being driven by a different function. So making sure the right people are available and performing the appropriate tasks, so it's getting them up to speed on that.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Okay, so some of the things that went well with the process, we found that UAT of the actual device went much more quickly and smoothly. We had very few findings, if any. You know, we can't say enough that the instruments are eCRFs within Rave, so the teams actually see the forms as part in, their interactive review meetings. They see all that. So by the time we're provisioning devices for UAT, it's a matter of just entering some data, making sure the forms appear, entering some data, and then going in.
Yep. Okay.
Okay. I can take them. Yep. It's a matter of just entering some data. We actually provision devices for UAT to our CRO partners and our internal folks as well, so they have an opportunity to see the look and the feel. Our scientists also get in there and perform testing. So that was something that was significantly different before as well, not having the right roles and responsibilities being involved with the testing activity. So that is one of the successes that we've had. And as Diane mentioned, the Unified Study Build.
Apologies, I dropped off.
Sorry, Diane, you can continue. I was picking up for you.
Sorry, I don't know what's going on. It just dropped every once in a while. Where were you, at the Unified Study Build?
Yes.
Okay, so yes, it's all done in Architect. So it's just a CRF, and I think that makes things much easier. In terms of instrument development, it's much faster with translations. I've actually created a standardized training deck for teams to train investigator meetings, CRA trainings, and stuff like that. And it's very easy for teams now to take that deck and just swap in their study-specific materials. It's really just one slide that they have to do, so it allows for much more consistency in training. The teams like having the data, the unified data extract. It's real-time data, and so the SDTM programming that we do also happens more quickly rather than waiting for a transfer. And then just, as the instruments are CRFs, they're included in the annotated inpatient CRF functionality out of Rave.
So let me ask you about UAT. So I've been working in the ePro-eCOA world for 16 years, and I have not usually seen people say that UAT went well. And it's frustrating for a number of folks. And you're telling me that with this change in new technology that the clinical teams actually had a good experience with UAT. They said it was easier and it was faster. I mean, you're talking like a couple days now as opposed to weeks?
I've seen it done in a day, in hours.
Wow. That's fascinating. That's really the testament to like timeline reduction and simplicity. So that's great to hear. And when we talk about instrument development, much faster translation, this is an area that is a huge piece of frustration in the industry in general. dealing with translations, rolling out those translations live. Give me an example from one of your studies. When you rolled out the study, did you deploy were you able to deploy all the translations on day one, or did you have to roll them out in series, one after the other? How did you do that?
Up to this point, we've been rolling them out. We start with English, and then we go as the countries come up. It's just a timing thing at this point.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Great.
But we haven't gone live with the site without a correct translation. So we just have to keep. You just have to keep on top of it. Yeah.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Okay. So far, to date, we have 9 studies in production. We have 6 studies in startup, and there are more coming behind these. We do use ClinRow and ePro in the clinic, as well as eDiaries that are at home by the patients. We are across some therapeutic areas, oncology and hematology, as well as inflammation and immunology. Our patient populations range from pediatric to adult to elderly, so across the board. And we now have some legacy live studies that, as I mentioned before, that are amending their protocols to add eCOA, and they are looking to use Patient Cloud.
Let me ask you about the patient population. This goes to both of you. Has there been any feedback? I always, again, being in the industry for this long, I see it as just people think that the elderly can't use the device, and they get worried. And yes, I think, depending on the therapeutic area and indication, you might want to be concerned about that, especially if they're cognitively impaired. But what is the feedback so far from elder folks from using these tablets or devices in these studies? Do you having any issues, or do you have mostly positive feedback? What would you say there, Diane?
We haven't had any specific feedback as yet. It's one of those things, as our studies enroll, we'll be collecting that type of feedback. But so far, we haven't heard anything contrary at this point.
Great. Okay. And this is all the 9 studies in production. This is all in the past year.
Yes.
This has been live in the past year. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Dan. So to tie back into some of the earlier slides we had regarding the key value drivers and what did we actually meet. Still, we have some improvements. Obviously, when you implement a project, there's areas that are going to need to be adjusted, and Diane went through those challenges with us. But what did we actually meet from what we had proposed earlier on? And really, it is the adoption and training issue that has definitely been addressed. We have much more streamlined training materials. It's very clear where to go to. The message is consistent. We really see a value in the reusability of instruments, as Diane had just mentioned, especially around the translations as well, because it ties clearly into our standards process and ultimately our SDTM mapping process and automation as well. So we have seen some reduction in timeline for the instruments as well to migrate because it's building a CRF form. It's very quick and easy. There's some nice system functionality that we also take advantage of that is in place, such as the timestamps for the audit trails, so we don't have to worry about that. It's a back end that we get, right? So we know exactly when the patient's adding everything and entering into the database, so being able to see that and track compliance using that data is fabulous for us. And as mentioned, the translation reuse, once the questionnaire had been created, our metadata is present and the translations are in place. And of course, there's QC that your team does as well for translations.
That's an important metric. The reuse of translations in this environment is not normal. Now, in the metadata environment, what you've implemented, you're able to reuse everything, truly reuse, not just the front end of what it looks like on the screen, but the back end database. That's great.
Yep. And again, our oversight, we definitely hit this value driver. We have Diane, who is a central person that people can go to and help really streamline process, collect feedback from lessons learned. There's program meetings that she attends. She liaises with metadata and the programming environment, and also with our standards teams, clinical teams. So her role really touches into to all the functions that utilize eCOA in our organization. So having her liaise amongst them has really been of value. It really helps people who are new to it as well, who have not implemented on studies before, get up to speed. So it's a smoother transition for them. As I alluded to earlier, the process and the rollout and the continuous support is really what's going to make it successful at the end of the day as well. So, and then really some around our data analysis and collection. Obviously, the limit, no reconciliation at this point anymore because it's integrated within Rave. The data transmits within seconds into the application of Rave itself. You can look at the data within there and do any type of reporting you wished in real time. And again, we don't have DCFs associated with this because the data is transferring right into the system at that given point in time. And Diane also had mentioned it earlier around windowing. We do window our visits. We want the data collected when it was supposed to be collected. And if it is not at that time, then it is what it is. But this is a very important, critical piece for us to get accurate information from our patients. So that was one of the
I'm seeing
points.
About the improved site experience.
Yeah.
One device for all studies. So we are no longer need to ship stacks of tablets for every study. It's one device for all.
Yes, and it's familiar to them because it has that look and feel, the app of like the Rave application. But the way that site mode, and I know that's a little technical, but the way that function works, they actually can log in as if they're logging into Rave. They pick the study that they're using. They can pick their patients and move on and enter the data or give the device to the subject if needed. But they actually can see all the studies they're associated with. And I think a lot of us use sites, same sites for multiple trials. So you do have that efficiency there that you're not also stacking them with a lot of devices. And it helps also to go to familiarity with reuse for the site experience because it becomes second nature to them and helping their patients along completing questionnaires within that tablet.
That's great. That's a great
Translates right to that for the patients. Yep.
Great. Okay. Well, Diane and Stacy, I want to thank you for coming in and speaking with us today and presenting your experiences. I think this slide here really speaks to the value drivers that you've been able to achieve, and it sounds like the measurable impact is truly measurable to be able to prove to your management and your teams that it's working. It sounds like there's more to come when it comes to implementing this. I think at this point now I want to be able to take some questions from the audience. And so on the left-hand side or on your screen there's a Q&A pod. You guys can put in a question for us. We will address some questions and we'll do that now for the next few minutes. So if you go ahead and put some questions in, we'll address them. We thank you for your time. We have a few coming in already. That's great. Take a look. Okay, does Medidata have an eCOA support line for sites and sponsors? I'll ask this to you. Well, we do, yes.
Yes,
but
Diane, I would leave that to Diane, our eCOA manager.
Diane, how has the support line been? Do you get a lot of help desk calls? I guess the question is, yes, a support line exists for sites and patients to call. Medidata takes care of that as part of the solution. What's the experience been like for your teams?
They still, in some cases, they forget to put the ticket in, and they'll come through me, and then, we just have to remind them to go, officially put in a ticket. That's the best way to get these things resolved. But, yeah, we use the help desk.
Great, and that's internal, with your internal teams. So what about from the sites themselves and even from patients? Have there been any major issues, or has this been the typical login and connectivity issues? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Typical. We did have, we had a couple of sites trying to go through the wrong way. They were trying to do patient registration instead of site mode. But again, it's either having the CRAs talk them through it, or actually we've had some of the Medidata project managers talk them through it as well. So there's lots of help. You just throw out the line, and we can help them.
Great. Okay. I have a question. Someone's asking about your paper backup process. If there were connectivity issues at the site, what would be your plan to support that? Diane, I guess, I don't know if you've experienced them yet, but what would happen there in the contingency plan?
I mean, we haven't had that happen yet, but, you know, they can, I don't know, Stacey, you're more fluent in this than I am.
Oh, sure. We also have the data plan option that we paid for, so
Right.
they should always have connectivity.
So data plans and Wi-Fi, both available, yeah.
Both, right. So there's an option to include that, and it's worth every penny, because if that was a concern of everyone's as well. 100%, no backup, then what happens? The other one that they came up with, what if Rave is down and it's on the device and it doesn't go in? It's a hypothetical question, but you hit the submit button and it submits. The data's not stuck on the device either, right?
It just goes and
it goes and
in.
Then it'll go into the system. But that's important to note, because you have your audit trail timestamps as well. But that question was something that came up, and of course we haven't had any issues of that like that at all, obviously. But it was a question that clinical was bringing up. So
sure, that's fair.
I'm sure somebody out there is thinking it.
Yeah, it's always like the what if, right? And that's real life, right?
Mind. Yeah.
Okay, here's another question. How is the system with different modality devices globally? So modality devices, I guess, is, well, we're deploying iPads to the clinics. We're deploying Android phones to the patients, and that's when we deploy. You guys haven't run any studies in BYOD yet, right? So everything is still provisioned.
Right.
So that works globally. I know that we have depots across the world at Medidata, so we have that set up to support the global logistics. We're dealing with customs and VAT issues, and we're able to get devices to sites all around the world, and the languages are already set up. So the app itself is set up and translated into about 65 languages out of the box. So that's not something that the client has to do. Obviously, we're getting translations from the authors and implementing that in the system, but the app itself is already localized based on the settings in the system. Do you lease the equipment? So that's the question. The question is, it's a rental. Yes, all of the devices coming out of Medidata are rentals. You're not buying this at your organization. They're not on your balance sheet. So these are all lease rentals. Yes. Does Medidata help with licensing for diary devices and quality of life? We mentioned that earlier, and the answer is yes. Medidata does do that, but Celgene does have the clinical teams are responsible for doing that as part of the process you guys have set up internally.
Yep.
And we can provide support as necessary.
Yep.
So that's that. Okay. What is the setup time from contract execution to FPI to go live? So there's also a number of metrics to track here when it comes to setup time. I think the last time we spoke on your metrics in the project team meetings, we were seeing some of your studies going live in 7 weeks. We see it 7 to 8 weeks typically from the very first studies, and that's without reuse. And so that's actually there. What I will say to this question is that you guys have an enterprise agreement with Medidata, which contract execution is really, the contract is executed on a higher level, so these things do go faster because you've signed up. Is there anything else to say here about timelines? That's the general guidance right now.
Oh, I would just add that, the timeline really starts when the prerequisites are in Medidata's hands. So it's the license and the actual copies of the instruments, like you're saying, rather than the contract execution.
Yeah, the contract execution piece is the easy piece. It really ties into getting that stuff to licensing piece very early on.
Yep.
Yeah.
So also related to the author licensing process, to you, Diane, what percentage, if any, of the authors and license holders requested or required testing or screenshots of their instruments to the system?
All of them have up to this point.
Yeah. Okay. And
that
process.
They want to see the screenshot of it. I shouldn't say testing. They want to see the screenshot.
Yep. So I will add to that by saying that Medidata is embarking on a global library project right now, and you guys are obviously part of this, that we are getting pre-approvals from authors, especially the ones that require some of this, so that they pre-approve their approval on screenshots that, because of actual true reuse, will speed this process, and they've approved it once, and they don't need to see it on every study. Yes, there will be authors, we all know who they are, the ones that will require, regardless of whatever process you have in place, they will want to see it every time. But there's a large majority of folks that we're able to get into this library project that we are building at Medidata for the industry. This isn't just a Celgene library, although you guys do have that. we're building something for the industry that will make this process much, much smoother. So that's important. Okay, we'll have just a time for one more question, I think. So if you can sum up real quick, how do you see this system has impacted your overall workload at Celgene, and how have you preferred and really seen the benefits of this system? If you could sum it up in a sentence of why the Medidata ecosystem has helped Celgene in changing their process and moving forward. Diane, I'll start with you.
I mean, in terms of, I think it's made a big difference in terms of study startup. Of course, in the first few studies, it hasn't been perfect, but we're moving towards that, and the reusability piece is just key. We're getting ready to go live with a study now that is 100% reuse, and I'm excited to see what we're going to turn around for a timeline with the study. I don't know, Stacey, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I just think also that the streamline of the actual application and the data going in, our stats people are obviously super excited about having access to the data much quicker. Our clinical teams as well, being able to run reports from a central location off of it. So that has also been quite a benefit. Once they get in there and play around and having the right people doing the UAT and giving them a device and being able to provide the right support for the sites, once they have their hands on it, they know it's a lot easier, and being able to actually see it go in makes it real for them. So that's actually been like a really positive experience overall for us.
Great, thank you. Well, Diane, Stacey, thank you so much for joining us today. This concludes our webinar, and I'll turn the call back over to our moderator. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Thanks a lot, Joe. I'd like to thank the audience for attending this Fierce Markets webinar and submitting so many great questions. I'd also like to thank our speakers for participating and Medidata for presenting. As a reminder, this webinar has been recorded, and you will be able to access the recording within 24 hours by using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier. Thank you again for joining, and we look forward to seeing you at future events.